Good morning. This is the Sunday after Christmas 2020, and I just want to share a little bit of some thoughts today coming from the book of Isaiah that have to do with Jesus our Savior and how incredible that is that He came and who He is. And I want to use a few of the very familiar texts that we use around this time of year, and I want to fill in a little bit of detail about them and give us a bigger picture than just plucking the verse out, so to speak, and using it just in reference to Christmas. So if you want to, if you would turn to Isaiah the 7th chapter, and we'll start with probably the most familiar verse to everyone regarding who Jesus is and when He comes. In Isaiah the 7th chapter, we find this familiar verse in verse 14. Therefore the Lord Himself will give you a sign, and behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. Now this verse is quoted in the book of Matthew, and so we reference it to the coming of Jesus because Matthew references it to the coming of Jesus. But there's more to the story here, the rest of the story. What is the rest of the story around this verse? If you go back and you read this chapter, you will find that Judah, the southern kingdom, is being attacked by Syria and Israel, the northern kingdom. And Assyria is kind of waiting in the wings, another great enemy. And so Isaiah prophesies here not only about the coming of a son. It says, he's talking to Ahaz, the king here, and then he brings up this thing about the son, the son that was coming, and it's a confusing text because in one sense we don't see Ahaz's son as that kind of a ruler. So what is Isaiah saying? Well, Syria and Damascus, Damascus is in Syria, but Syria and Israel seem strong, and Judah seems weak, and so they're terrified of these nations coming against them. Yet God prophesies just before this through Isaiah that they are like stumps. They're smoldering. They're gonna go out. And so he's first saying to Ahaz that that the threat is going to pass by. And then he's asking Ahaz to trust in him, for the greater foe is Assyria. And in a sense, he's saying to his people, Judah, that there is going to come a Messiah, and it will mean that God is with us. Now, Judah really doesn't trust in God. And Isaiah is speaking forward to a time when people will trust in God being with them, and they will see the greater, and the virgin will give birth. And that's why Matthew quotes this verse in reference to Jesus. What I want to do is just kind of take us into this a bit. And in chapter 8, you see this, that there's an Assyrian invasion. The Syria is coming against them. And yet God speaks again in verse 8 of Assyria. And it's kind of a judgment. And he says, O Lord, or O Emmanuel, be broken, you peoples, and scattered. And give ear, all you countries. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. And then it goes on to talk about waiting for the Lord. And fear God and wait for God. And it says to dread, you don't have to dread the enemies on the earth, but dread the God who rules over all enemies, who rules over all nations. The nations tremble in the presence of God. And so Isaiah binds up this testimony, it says. He binds up the testimony. And then we get to chapter 9. And here Isaiah unfolds a bigger promise. And it gives us this reference for a child will be born. And again, this is referenced in the New Testament. But it gives us this mighty promise of someone who comes above all, but comes in a weak place, in a weak way, in a humble way. He comes against the powers of the earth, the dominions of Satan, but in a way that is surprising, in a way that's unexpected. So if we turn to the 9th chapter, we see this verse. We see, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end, on the throne of David and over the kingdom, to establish and uphold it with justice and righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. And who will accomplish this? The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. If this is a picture of a king, earthly king, it makes no sense. For no earthly king can do this. In fact, every word there, every word that's described God, has this sense of this power beyond the earth, the power beyond the scope of the realms of the earth. If we go back and look at it, and a child is born, a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and he shall be called Wonderful Counselor. The idea there is a counselor that has an ability that's beyond earthly powers, a counselor that can counsel beyond what you see, what you hear. And it fits so distinctly in Isaiah's time as they look around, and they're counseling by themselves. They're looking in themselves and going, oh no, here's an enemy, and it's big and it's powerful. And Isaiah says that there's coming a counselor who sees all, who knows all, and is so wise he can predict, and he can come in those moments when you can't understand. The second thing, it says that he is a mighty God. And here's a sense that it doesn't tell us about armies here. It doesn't say he's coming with mighty armies. It says he's coming as a child. It's flipped. The power is flipped, so to speak. What power does a child have? What realms of control does a child have? Jesus came as a child. The King of Kings came, but it wasn't an ordinary king. It wasn't an ordinary counselor. It wasn't an ordinary might and strength. There were no armies behind him. There was no power to confront power in one sense. But here is the great significance. That God, in his weakest place, as he came to earth as a child, as Jesus humbled himself and became a child, God in his weakest place was as mighty as any army on the earth. It is only by his mercy that he controls his judgment of the wickedness. And so this mighty force comes as a helpless child. This mighty force of God comes in a humble way to do the incredible and do the mighty. He does not come as a king of a nation, but as a child. A child not coming for destruction, but a child coming for redemption. Trust in God, the opposite of what this people of covenant were trusting in. They were trusting in their armies. And God says, trust in me. And here he says that there will come a time when there will come this child, and this child will have the ability to counsel. This child will have the power of a mighty God. And then it says everlasting Father. If a king was anything, he was the provider as a father. If a king was anything, he saw his nation as his child. He took care of them and helped them. But this was not to be an ordinary father, because what's the distinction here? An everlasting Father. An everlasting Father. It would be a father who does what is a father is an example of, but does it in a mighty way, in a way that everlasting goodness. If Jesus says about a father that he will give good things, think about how the everlasting Father gives good things. And talking about, in a sense, who Jesus is, that he is like a father and gives. This is not really a Trinitarian example here, but the capacity and the grasp of the eternal in the things that Jesus gives to us as a father. And then finally it says a Prince of Peace. A Prince of Peace that's unequaled. A peace that cannot be contained. A peace that cannot be described. A peace that goes on forever and ever. God delivers by love. God breaks the strength of Satan by his love. God destroys Satan by becoming weak. In his weakest place, God destroys Satan. Think about it at the end of Christ's life. When Satan is there thinking, I have won, I have destroyed Jesus as he came in the flesh. And by that weakest place where Jesus dies, he destroys the dominion of sin. What an incredible, incredible thing. And finally, I just want us to look at Isaiah 11 and 12. This is so thick. This is so rich with all the images of that day, and yet it has so pertinent to our day and what we long for. In chapter 11, Isaiah goes on and describes the eternal kingdom of Christ, the eternal place where in verse 6 it says, the wolf will lie down with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion will eat together, and the little child will lead them. A kingdom of peace where, again, the power is not in the strength of might, of violence, but in the peace that the child brings. And finally, if you turn to Isaiah 12, I just want to read this one of the shortest chapters in Isaiah. I just want to read it as we end. And you will say in that day, and all that looks forward to a time yet to come, right? There's on this earth now, there is not a peace where the wolf and the lamb lie down, but there will be someday. Christ will come and everything will be there will be a new world and a new order, and Christ will rule by love and by relationship. And this is contained in chapter 12. And you will say in that day, I will give thanks to the Lord, for you who were angry with me, your anger is turned away. Now you comfort me. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust in him and not be afraid. For the Lord God is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. With joy I will draw water from the wells of salvation. And you will say in that day, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds, and proclaim his name as exalted. Sing praises to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known throughout all the earth. Shout and sing for joy, O inhabitant of Zion, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. This is the great promise to Israel. This is the great promise to us, that we through Christ can draw water from our salvation, not an earthly water that will satisfy for a moment, but eternal water that will last forever. May you find joy in these passages in Isaiah as you reflect on who Jesus is, that he came from earth as a humble child, what he does in great ways against the forces of evil. He destroys them by his love. And finally, he gives us a place where we can have relationship with him and someday come into his kingdom forever. May that be a great help to you and a great inspiration to you, those passages from Isaiah, as we thank God for all of that he does. In Jesus Christ coming, in Jesus Christ dying, in Jesus Christ being alive to fulfill all that is revealed. Thank you for your time today, and may God bless your coming new year.